1, 0, 0, and liftoff.
Welcome to another episode of Filter. On this show, we recognize that the world can be a confusing place to live in. And so what I seek to do on this show is to equip you to live with biblical clarity in our confusing world so that you can face the chaos of life with wisdom, integrity, and courage. I'm glad to welcome to the show today Barry Rowan. From a range of C-suite roles, Barry Rowan, a Harvard Business School graduate, has been instrumental in building and transforming 8 businesses, primarily in the technology and communications space. In addition, he serves on corporate, university, and nonprofit boards. Rowan and his wife Linda have 2 adult sons and live in Denver. Rowan, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Aaron. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, glad to have you on. I've been looking forward to getting to talk to you. As we were talking about right before we jumped on, whenever I first looked up your bio on IVP's website, it's really long. You've done a lot. Even in the short bio, as it says, you've been a part of several businesses. So before we jump into talking about our main topic today, just share with us your story and what you've done over the course of your life. Tell us a little bit more about that bio.
Sure. Let me give you the external view, and then I'll give you a little bit of the internal view, which we can get into more later. But externally, I grew up on a ranch in Idaho where my parents were both veterinarians and thought I would be a doctor and have a degree in chemistry and biology as a result of that. I love the science, love the idea of helping people. But I really became enamored with this idea of leverage. And I thought, a doctor's contribution is limited to the 8 or 10 hours a day that they work. And I thought if we're working toward the right set of goals, our contribution is multiplied by the number of people we have working together toward those goals. And that literally was the reason I went into business. I knew nothing about business. So then I went back to business school, and I spent, as you mentioned, the last 40 years having to build or turn around 8 different businesses. So part of my career has been as a CEO or president, and then was the chief financial officer for 4 public companies. 6 out of the 8 businesses were successful, 1 selling for $10 billion. 2 were not successful, and I often talk about the ones that were not, because I think we learn a lot more from our failures, and I think that's a place where God meets us in very profound ways. So that's kind of the external bio. Internally, I really came to a surrendered faith out of a crisis of meaning and work in my late 20s. I'd gone to church my whole life and really loved God, revered God, but did not have what I would describe as really a submitted, surrendered relationship to Him. And that came out of this crisis of meaning and work. And out of that, I decided that I would take Jesus seriously and believe who He says He is. And if you're going to do that, I think we have to follow His command to give up everything we have to be His disciples. So basically, on a run around the lake by our house when I was almost 30, I did that and said, Lord, I put my life in your hands. But there were heel marks in the sand, I would tell you that. I kind of came kicking and screaming into the kingdom of God. But that still didn't answer the question of meaning and work. And that would take another 8 years and 350 pages in a journal to sort through all of that and to really realize that I was just looking at work all wrong. And God took me through what I would describe as a succession of paradigm shifts, a couple of dozen things I had wrong. And that in many ways is the heart of the book that we're going to talk more about today. So I have a profound interest in living one life under God and to bring meaning to our work and to have every moment of our lives be charged with the meaning that only God can provide.
Yeah, that's excellent. So you mentioned several paradigm shifts that you had to make to still really help connect your faith to your work. What were some of those paradigm shifts? Particularly, what was the incorrect assumptions or paradigms that you're living with before that had to be changed? And do you think some of those paradigms that you're holding before, do you see those reflected in a lot of people in our culture beyond, or were they just unique to your own experience?
No, I think to take the last part of your question first, there's a lot of commonality in those paradigms that we all wrestle with. And I think what is most deeply true for us individually is often most universally true for others. And as I talk to many, many people around the world about this, I've discovered that it really is the case. And I'll give you a couple of examples of those paradigms. And one of the fundamental ones was I was looking at life from the outside in instead of from the inside out. I thought, if I just get the right job, then I'll be filled up. And if I achieve, and I'm kind of a wind-up toy for achievement, if I just achieve one more thing, that achievement will fill me up. And that was just wrong. And that really the deeper truth is that we don't live life from the outside in, we live life from the inside out. And the corollary to that is um, that I was trying to derive meaning from my work instead of bringing meaning to the work. I thought, again, if I just got the right job, that's going to be the source of the work. And what I really came to understand was that it's God's perspective of our work that brings meaning to it. And the onus is on us, particularly in jobs like business, where there's less what you might think is intrinsic value. The onus is on us to bring that meaning to the work. So if, for example, you're a nurse or a doctor or a pastor or a social worker or some of those kinds of jobs, it's apparent why we're doing that. And there's a lot of what you could say is intrinsic value. I've come to conclude that the kind of work we do, even if it's in business, any of it can be holy. And there's not a hierarchy in that, but the less sort of intrinsic value there is in the work that we do and the nature of the work we do, the more the responsibility is on us to develop a life-giving perspective of that work as seen through the eyes of God. And so that was a very fundamental thing I had wrong, was I was just looking through the telescope through the wrong end. Another one that I had wrong was I was trying to fit God into my plans instead of being willing to submit to his plan. And and then that led to this question about, well, does God even exist first? And I concluded, as the lawyers would say, based on the preponderance of the evidence, I think it's more likely than not that he does exist. But for me at the time, it wasn't like a 95-5 decision. It was more like 70-30. But I thought, no, I'm going to put all my weight down on that conclusion. But then having come to that conclusion is, okay, well, then does God have a plan? And as we get to know him and his scripture more, that he does, he knows he has the plan. He knows the plans he has for us and to prosper us and to follow his son. And so as those pieces began to click together, and I realized that my role was to fit myself into God's plans, that began to open up a whole new spectrum of opportunity and really gave God permission to do his work in me. I think that's why surrender for me is the starting point for the spiritual journey. It gives this God who is the creator of the universe, but is so gracious and will not impose himself on us, the permission to infuse himself in our lives and bring that meaning to them that we so keenly desire.
Yeah, so you mentioned trying to find value in your work that you instead had to learn to bring to your work. If we could just flesh that out a little bit more, if you were to name that value, what was that value that you were looking for from your work that you instead needed to bring to your work? Because I think that might help people who are listening and struggling with something similar, but they know they're discontent, but they're unable to name what the discontent is, if that makes sense. Well,
yeah,
if you had to name, what was that value?
Yeah, well, I thought that, again, I thought that if I just have the right job, it will fill me up. So I had the emphasis on the wrong syllable, right? I mean, I was looking at it just completely in the wrong way. And the nature of the work can never fill us up. God alone can fill us up. So what I concluded out of that, and the kind of the life-giving perspective of my work that I ended up developing was to contribute to a better society as seen through the eyes of God. So that became my working job definition. And the way I kind of came onto this actually was I was on one of those shuttle buses from the outlying parking lot at an airport, where all the cheapskates park like me. And I was on that bus with a bunch of my fellow cheapskates. And there was this woman who was driving the bus, probably in her late 30s, and she was joyful. And, you've all seen those drivers, and most of them are zombies, right? And who wouldn't be? You're doing the same loop 8 hours a day, just so repetitive. But she seemed to love her job. And I was the last of the cheapskates to get off the bus. And I said, could I ask you a question? And she said, sure. I said, do you like your job? She said, I love my job. And I said, well, what do you like about your job? She said, I meet interesting people going interesting places. And I thought, if she can develop this life-giving perspective of her work in a job like that, surely I, as the chief financial officer of a public company at the time, can do that. But I could not do it. It took me a couple of years to kind of really be able to articulate it in a way that was honoring and truthful for me. And that's when I arrived at this understanding that my job definition is to contribute to a better society as seen through the eyes of God. And then when I came to that understanding, it was like, well, okay, God has called me to follow him. So I accepted Jesus' invitation to come follow me, but where he has led me is into business. So then what is the distinctive about business in terms of contributing to a better society is seen through the eyes of God? And I then was able to articulate that. And we could have a wonderful long discussion about that. But there are really, I think, four things that are distinctive about business. One is responsible value creation. Not that money is the solution to the world's problems, but economic value is it's a hallmark of a well-functioning society because it's evidence that people are released to achieve their potential. And I don't know if people have ever thought about this, but in many ways, business is the only creator of economic value. Everything else distributes it. And so that's a very distinctive role that we in business have to play. The second is creating jobs, that enables people to live into the full expression of themselves and to grow into that place that God has called us to be. And if you do the math, we'll work about 100,000 hours in our lifetime. And that's a lot of hours to go home feeling unfulfilled or, do whatever we do to take out our frustration. So responsible value creation, creating jobs, serving customers. When we're serving our customers, we're serving God because God is embedded in every human being and being a good corporate citizen. So when I was at Vonage, for example, we provided voice over the internet. And when the tsunami hit Japan, when I was there, we offered free calling to Japan, which was something we could do. And it's just being a good corporate citizen. So when I began to see those values that business could bring to society, then all the pieces click together so that every moment then becomes an opportunity to live on purpose. And I could make the connection between, silly example that was kind of a test for me between somebody on our team doing a formula in an Excel spreadsheet, and how does that connect to my purpose in life? Well, I could now see that because let's say they're doing a business model for a strategic plan. Well, you want to get the formula right so the strategy is right. And if the strategy is right, we can execute on it so the business can fulfill its literally a noble and God-ordained purpose in society. So then I could see how every moment could connect to me what was my essential purpose in life. So that is the way that God has brought meaning to my work, is that perspective of work. And so I would just encourage people, take the time to develop a life-giving perspective of your work as seen through the eyes of God. That we can either have a life-draining or a life-giving perspective. You can drive that shuttle bus and say, I hate this job and I'm doing it for the money and I can't wait to get off at 5 o'clock. Or you can say, I meet interesting people going interesting places. You're still driving the shuttle bus, but so what happened to me was I changed jobs without changing business cards as I went through this experience. And I was still in the same seat, but the way I looked at my work just massively changed really the job that I was performing.
How long would you say it took you to make these paradigm shifts? In my own experience and working with others, I find that it usually doesn't happen overnight.
Well, no, it certainly didn't happen overnight. And for me, in retrospect, it was a 17-year struggle. The seeds of the struggle were sown in college when I was trying to figure out a major, like I talked about. Do I be a doctor or should I go into business? And but then I realized that this kind of uneasy tension existed within me. This love of God on the one hand, and this steely, strong will on the other hand. And so God had to come into the place of reconciling those. But it was really after surrendering my life to Christ and giving him permission, as I said, to do his work in me. It was another 8 years that I went through those questions, and I wrote 350 pages in my journal, mostly in the middle of the night. But, I embraced that challenge. And the essence of that challenge is what is embodied in the book that has come out this week. So what I really find is that if we embrace the pain, God gives purpose to the pain. And, he's not a sadist, that every moment of every day, even our biggest challenge, and especially our biggest challenges, conspire to shape us into the shape that he wants to make us into. That those challenging times, even an 8-year struggle to find meaning work, are the strong thumbs of the potter pressing on the clay to make it into that shape. And if you're a strong-willed guy like me, it takes a lot of pressure to reshape that hardened clay.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. Because just as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, so I'm in my early 30s and most of my friends are around the same age as me. They're in their mid or later 30s. My church has a lot of people in their 20s, late 20s. And I just hear a lot of the same struggles as what you're describing now. And I've had a lot of the same conversations, so I'm just thinking through those things. And, and so one of the questions I'm thinking of that I talk about with people often is, so what if I accept everything that you're saying? I fully agree. I believe it. And I'm working my darndest, to do it, to bring the value instead of trying to get the value out of it. But, I still have times where I'm dissatisfied with my work. I still have times where I question, I'm not going to my work to get my value. I'm going to the Lord to really be filled, but it just still feels like I might not be in the right spot, or I still have this dissatisfaction with this role or this city, or and so on. And so how do you discern between, I'm looking to get value out of the job instead of bringing that to the job versus, it might be God's calling to change roles, change companies. I'm hoping, or I'm not hoping, I think you do have a good answer, because you were with, was it 8 different companies over your career? So, you changed a few times. So yeah, what would you say to someone who's wrestling with, I'm doing my best to soak all this up into my heart, but still fighting some dissatisfaction and just wondering, could God be leading me to make a change?
Sure. No, it's a really important question. And I guess a few perspectives I would offer that. First is work is a noble profession in that, if you look at Genesis, God designed work before the fall, not after. The earth was created and there was no one to till the earth. So work is an expression of us as we are made in the image of God. So I think that's important to recognize, is that work is a noble dimension of our lives. Having said that, work is still work. There are parts of every job that we don't like to do, and I'm sure you have, at least 3% of your job that you would prefer not to do. But it just comes with the territory, and so I think just having a maturity about that is important. So just kind of recognizing that work is noble, but that it also carries with it challenges, and that they will always be there. Having said that, when you come into this place of, okay, am I in the right job or should I change jobs? To me, the very first and most important thing to do is to go to God. Our dear Lord has a perspective of every moment. And if we submit ourselves to him and listen to him, it will clarify over time. I think a temptation, particularly people at your age or in their 20s, which was true of me too, is to want to jump ship. I mean, I spent the latter half of my 20s, I didn't change jobs, but I spent 6 of the 8 years I was at my first company basically looking for what I should do besides what I was doing. And gratefully, I didn't change job, but I was trying to buy businesses 5 different times. I tried to have my own business, or my wife and I did, that we could, after coming to faith, found and operate on the principles of God, and none of them worked out. And finally, being a hard-headed guy, was, maybe this is really not what God wants. And in fact, for me, the conclusion was, that would have been too easy. I realized that I was trying to create a world that I could control, even if it was for the God's purposes. And he was inviting me to work in a world that was completely beyond my control, and invited me into much bigger jobs and businesses that I would have been able to have a chance to contribute to had we done it on our own. So it's a process of discovery. But I think I would encourage people to not just jump ship. I would encourage people to frankly stay in the pain. When we're in struggle, the temptation is to skirt around the edge of the struggle, to make the black a little bit gray. Why? Because it's painful, right? But in my experience, the real solution is to make the black blacker than black, to go right through the center of the pain, and to just enter into that pain with our Lord through a prayer of what I call immersion. Lord, I'm going to immerse myself in these circumstances, and I'm going to immerse myself in you. And by doing that, you will meet me where I am. And God he is the great I am. And the only place we can really meet him is just as I am, buck naked, just as I am, with all of the foibles, with things I'm wrestling with the questions, with the confusion. But if we stay in that place, God will meet us there. And I would just add one other piece, and that is a paradigm shift that I've had to go through, back to your previous question, is there's a big difference between striving and abiding, particularly for kind of high octane people who are wired for achievement. It's about striving. And even if it's striving to become a better follower of Jesus or a more complete human being. But that's our kind of innate tendency. The better way and the way to go to achieve our fulfillment is not striving but abiding. Abide in me and I will abide in you. Rest, come to me, all who are weary and burdened. And so for me, that's very, very practical. It's very tangible. And so 90% of my prayer is listening. Lord, I just come to you. I'm confused. I don't know what to do. I'm angry with this person. I don't know if it's justified anger, if it's my fault. In what ways would you want to work the yeast more fully through the dough? And if you, in good conscience, I think, work through that process and come to a place of understanding with what God might have us do. Sometimes he calls us to say, and sometimes he calls us to leave. And it's a process of discernment. But the process itself is a great gift. As Oswald Chambers says, we call the process, God calls the result or the purpose. So,
yeah, that's good. That's good. And it is all too tempting to just want to get out of the discomfort and escape the process, because when you're in the middle of it, it's not real fun. But yeah, that's a good word. Whenever you're working and you have a family and you're serving in your church and you've got a lot of irons in the fire, as people say, it can be really difficult to hold on to this God-centered perspective about all the things that you're doing and just start to get caught up in the things. And so I imagine that for you, over the course of your career and through doing this work, helping others, you had to learn how to put boundaries around work, around different things in your life, learn to say no to certain things in order to protect that perspective. And so can you walk us through, how did you maintain and perspect this, I guess what I'm calling a God-centered approach, or you've called the spiritual art to business? What are some of the things that you had to say no to? And what are the things that you put boundaries around? How did you discover those? And then how did you execute them?
Yeah, well, it is a really important question again. For all your listeners who are probably, many of whom are in their 20s and 30s, I have bad news for you. It's only going to get worse. It's going to get much harder. You're challenging people. There will be more and more demands on your time. You'll get asked to do more and more things. It only gets worse. It really does. So the sooner you can understand this and really live a life that is aligned with your sense of balance and congruence, the better. So let me start by offering kind of two ways to look at this. There's kind of a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension. The vertical dimension is congruence. It's what I am doing in this moment tied to my purpose in life. And that was the biggest challenge for me, and that's a lot of what this book is about, is I had such a hard time making those connections and having that connectivity between what I'm doing in this present moment and my purpose in life. But let's set that aside for a second. But it's really important to get that right, to have this life-giving perspective of your work. The horizontal one is balance, which is how much time do I spend alone with the Lord? How much time do I spend with my significant other? My wife and I have been married for 42 years, and we moved 16 times, and I've been to 49 countries, and so we've had a very active life, and so it's really important to stay connected, when you're in that role. So how much time do I spend with the Lord, with my wife, with our two sons, at work, serving in the community? And I learned this lesson the hard way. That when I was 30, our first son was born, and I came home from work, and he was about 6 months old. And I thought I was having a heart attack. And I came home, and Linda was there with Mark, and she said, "Well, you better drive yourself to the hospital. I'm here with our little boy. I got to stay here." So I did. So I drove myself to the hospital. They gave me a shot or whatever, gave me a shot of whatever they give you, and gave me Benadryl because I broke out in hives in the space of about 15 minutes, completely covered my body. And I thought,
wow,
what is going on? And the same thing happened the next night. I thought, wow, I have never had this happen before. And as Lynn and I talked about it, we realized it was stress. And the source of the stress was the way I was spending my time was not the way I wanted to be spending my time. Before our son was born, we were both working 60 to 80 hours a week, and we wanted to. We were investing in our careers. We loved it. We worked together on the weekends. We also skied 25 days a year. So it was kind of a work hard, play hard life. But now I wanted to be home with Mark. And so I realized that was a source of attention, that I was a slave to to the demands on my time. I had it inverted, right? There's a difference between whether we are a slave to them or a master of them, right?
Hmm.
And I was a slave to those demands on my time. And so I looked at my calendar. I was spending 8 to 10 hours a day on meetings. I would do all of quote my work at the end of the day or on the weekends. And I said to my assistant, "We've just got to fix this." So Lynn and I, we wrote down what we thought was balance for us. Again, that horizontal perspective. And it was working 50 to 55 hours a week. It was exercising 3 to 4 days a week. It was praying every day. It was being home for dinner every night when I was in town. It was traveling 30% of the time or less. I had jobs that I could travel 100% of the time, but then I knew if I traveled too much. And then it was not committing to any more than 2 civic boards at a time. And so that became balance for us. And I
Yeah.
carried that little 3x5 card around in my folio for 20 years. And I didn't have to carry it really, but I just wanted it as a reminder.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that way every week, but over time it was. I mean, that's basically how we realized it. And if I was getting out of whack, Linda would say, you're traveling a little too much. The kids need you more. Or if somebody would say, "Barry, would you be on this board?" And I would say, I have this silly little rule that I've said I could only do 2 civic boards at a time. And as Stephen Covey says, to paraphrase him, it's easy to say no when you have a stronger yes burning inside of you. So I
Mm.
would say to the person asking, I said, I've said yes to my family. I've said yes to doing a good job at work. That means that means I have to say no to a lot of things. But so I'm going to have to say no because my dance card is full. But, come back to me in a year when this board term expires. So most of your listeners have infinite jobs because they're talented people. And so the challenge is figuring out what is balance. How much time do you want to give to work and to other things, and while still doing a great job with excellence. But if without being clear, the world will determine what balance is for us, and we'll end up in the ditch. I mean, we'll just
Yeah.
end up distorted, contorted, unhappy, and we'll be living by the world's standards, and it will just never lead to happiness. And in fact, the last point on that, which I think I've only come to realize recently, and we don't use this word very often, but holiness is a source of happiness. And as we come to live more and more within the divine design, we come into this place of sustaining joy and peace. For a guy like me, that does not come naturally to. Gratitude does not come naturally to me because I'm much more focused on what's left to be done and what has been done, or to just enjoy the present moment. But that is what happens over time, is because we're living in conformance with the divine design. We're living in intimacy with the living God, that we realize that it's not up to us to change the world, that we are not the Messiah of the world. And as we come to really live those truths, we come into this place of profound peace and joy. So that's my encouragement. If I were to say something to the Barry Rowan of his late 20s, early 30s, that's what I would say to him.
Mm. That's really good. I like to joke with people that I have the spiritual gift of saying no. It's not difficult for me to set those boundaries and say no, but I know that there's people who are not built the same way. It's very difficult to say no. My wife is one of those people. She'll often, there's something that she knows she has to say no to, but she'll still ask me, like, "Hey, do you think that I can do this, or I should do this," just so that I can say no for her, as like kind of like a help. It's like, I don't know if it's so that she can put the blame on me, or if it's like a morale thing, but but yeah.
Well, you raise a really important point, Aaron, which is what is right or wrong for an individual depends on our starting point. And what can be right for one is wrong for another. I mean, I kind of use the picture of Mount Rainier in Seattle. We used to live there. And if you've ever been to Seattle, Mount Rainier is 14,000 feet and it comes up from sea level. So it's visible, for 100 plus miles around. Well, if you're starting from a point that is east of Mount Rainier, consider Mount Rainier sort of the truth or the right thing to do, or righteousness, whatever word you want to give it. If you're starting from the east, the right way to go to that truth is to go west, right? But if you're starting from the west, the right way to go to that truth is east. So if it's easy for you to say no, it might be something to pay attention to, is, do I say no too easily? Or are my boundaries are not God's boundaries for me? Or if it's harder for you to say no, and like your wife, then okay, what would it take for me to say no? And then to come to an understanding of what our stronger yeses are that enable us to say no. So it's really an important point because we tend sometimes to fall in this trap of kind of having a cookie cutter and saying, oh, this is how God works. Or, hi, my name's Barry Rowan, I have a plan for your life, right? It is not how it works. And that God created us each uniquely and distinctly, and the journey is unique and distinct for each of us.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. What do you think? So God, he institutes in creation, and then he commands in the Ten Commandments, and it's in other places in Scripture that he has a Sabbath built in for us, and so it's a part of the fabric of creation. It becomes a part of the life of Israel, and then it becomes something that's supposed to be a part of the life of the Christian as well. What do you think is the relevance of God's command and creation of the Sabbath? What is the relevance of Sabbath to the spiritual art of business? And I don't mean just the book, but your message of the book and living it out in life. Do you think there's a connection and importance there?
Oh, there's a total connection. And, if the creator of the universe took time to rest, should we not take time to rest, particularly because we are made in his image? And so needing to rest is a part of our design. And I think this frenetic society that we're in, it's evidence of our preoccupation with ourself and our self-aggrandizement, frankly, is because we think, oh, we're so important we can't rest, or I don't need it, or we don't have the discipline. And so for me, it's taking time alone with God, be it Sabbath day or time alone more broadly, is really important. And but just as some encouragement, for me, it's been a process that has grown over time. So taking time to be alone with God and to pray started as 10 minutes a day for me. I had this little book called The Upper Room, and it had a little story and a little scripture, and I would spend 10 minutes with it. And for me, the progression has gone from discipline to craving to now it's a responsibility to get this time alone with God and to rest. And so I started 10 minutes a day, and then I did the spiritual exercises in everyday life when I was in the early 40s. And a part of that was meeting with a spiritual director once a week and praying an hour a day. And that's when I really learned listening prayer. And then I took a purposeful pause, back to the point about rest, whether it's weekly or over longer periods of time. I've been working flat out for 25 years, and I looked at my wife and said, I just need rest. I am just fried. And we'd sold one of the businesses, and it was a successful business. We sold for 10 billion. And I thought, I'm going to just take a purposeful pause. And the theme of that pause was don't slur the rest. Our kids learn to play music. And when you're first learning to play music, you just slur the rest. But what you realize as more accomplished musicians, and I'm not one, it's not one of my talents, but the rest is what gives the richness to the music. And so the theme was don't slur the rest. Let God breathe fully into that rest. And so I did. It ended up being 3.5 years that I was out of work. But and then after a couple of years, I went back to an executive role because I felt so strongly about what we're talking about here, which is the power of business to contribute to a better society, that Lynn and I both said, I think I should go back to work. I was 50 when I took the pause. But I went on an 8-day silent retreat as a part of that. And it was a profound experience for me. I realized that God alone can meet us in the place of our deepest longing. And then I ended up doing a week-long silent retreat almost every year, even in the midst of turning around businesses. As you pointed out, I was involved with building or turning around 8 different businesses over 40 years. And I did that except for a couple of years when the last business, it was at Gogo, we put internet on airplanes, and it just got too intense and I couldn't take that time. And then to kind of culminate it, and I know most people can't do this at their stage, but I did the one thing on my bucket list this April. I actually retired from a corporate life in March, and we're launching this Encore Calling, beginning with this book. But the one thing on my bucket list was to do a month-long silent retreat. So I did that for the month of April, a month after I finished my corporate career. And it was the most profound and life-giving month of my life, Aaron. And many times I just sensed God saying, Barry, thank you for giving me this much space to love you so deeply. And I just experienced the love and the leadership of God. And why would we not take that time, whether it's 10 minutes a day, an hour a day, a day a week, perhaps doing a month-long retreat. But it's the place where God not only restores our soul, but He shows us the work He is doing in our soul and how He's constructing our soul. And there's this beautiful verse in Isaiah that, as a young man marries a young woman, so your builder will marry you. And this image that God is our builder, and ultimately we've drawn into this spousal relationship with Jesus that is just beyond our imagination. So why not take the time to do that, and to let God show us how He's using His work to do His work in us, for example. If we don't take that time, in my experience, we can't see. And so that time gives us the eyes to see, and it restores our energy, and it hones, and it's like sandpaper on our soul. It sensitizes us to the things of God. And so without that, just running flat out all the time, we become like Martha versus Mary, who was worried and distracted by many things. And well, it's like, when Jesus thinks about the lost sheep, he leaves the 99 and goes and finds the one. Well, think about that not as individuals, but we have 100 sheep within us, and there are parts of us that are also scattered, and that Jesus needs to go out and retrieve them. And for me, those sheep are stuck in a swamp somewhere, and if I don't give Him time to go and fetch those sheep and bring the herd back together, to collect myself and center myself around Him, the sheep end up scattered, and I live this life that is dissipated and entropic. I have a degree in chemistry. Entropy is, it's kind of one of the laws of the universe, is that things tend to randomness. And so if we don't take the time with God, our lives will tend to randomness, as opposed to meaning and centeredness.
That is so good. So, how do you think the church? Well, that's really broad. I mean, the church, but local churches. How can local churches better serve, equip, and teach the message of the spiritual art of business to their members, so that we can see a revolution, or a reformation, we can say, of Christians working in the marketplace today?
Yeah, well, first, I believe in the priesthood of all believers, right? I mean, I believe that all of us are called to full-time ministry, whether you're a pastor of a church or not. If you're a pastor of a church, you have a unique opportunity, a responsibility, a calling to help us live into that. So just to be very practical about it, I think you get the book. I mean, that's a very practical thing to do, and start some small groups. There's a discussion guide that goes with the book, that is designed for people to meet 5 times. So the book is divided into 4 main sections. That is the journey of the soul, and then the fifth meeting of a small group would be to say, well, how do you integrate this? And the book, by the way, is not, I don't really think of it as a book. I think of it as an invitation to experience God. It's 40 days, 40 short chapters, start with the scripture. Most of the little stories are foibles of my own career, and then reflection questions. And so take the time to ponder those questions, use them to draw into this conversation with God. And so I think, I had a friend tell me early in my spiritual journey to say, if it doesn't work for you, don't export it. And I think sometimes, so the role of a pastor is make sure it works for you. Do what you need to do to be living for God fully at every moment, and have the ability to connect the daily with the divine. And as you're able to do that, people will see that. They will resonate with that. They'll say, oh, I want some of that, because otherwise it's just preaching from the head versus, and it's again kind of outside in, versus if you're living it, it flows from the inside out, as in Colossians, the mystery that has been hidden throughout the ages, that Christ in you, the hope of glory. And as we begin to live that, as we become less and Jesus becomes more in us, so it's no longer I who live, but Christ living in us, He in us is expressed in everything we do, whether it's speaking at the pulpit, whether it's changing the diapers of our kids, whether it is meeting a friend for a beer, whatever that is, everything we do is the opportunity to express Christ in us. And, God is love. So that's how it will show up and what it'll look like to other people. And, people have very well-trained hypocrisy meters. And so if it's not being lived, if it's being spoken, and there's a disconnect between what we say and what we do, people will just shut it off. So the most important thing to do, I think, is for pastors and for people who want to live this way is to live this way, and to enter into that place of doing it, recognizing that none of us do it perfectly. And, whoever claims to be without sin is a liar, as John told us. It's very direct, so we're all on the journey. I mean, I'm 66, so I'm older than a lot of your listeners, perhaps. But I feel like in many ways, I'm just starting the journey. I'm just accepting and reaccepting this invitation from Jesus. Come follow me into this future that I will unfold for you. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So what would be the big takeaway that you hope readers gain after picking up and going through The Spiritual Art of Business?
Well, whether they're in business or not, I hope that what they will take away is the sacredness of our work, and for all of our work, whether it's our careers, we think about career, or being a stay-at-home mom, or whatever it is, that everything has the opportunity to be an expression of our faith. And work, the 100,000 hours we will work in that career is one of those. But that's what I hope people take, is that every moment of every day can be an opportunity to live fully for God in a way that will bring meaning to our lives and bring meaning to our work.
Yeah, that's good. I had a mentor once who taught that, and he would use a graph, and it was a circle cut into a pie. So there's lines, and he said, okay, let's just describe everything that you do. And so, well, there's my relationship with God. So God goes in one slice, and then he was like, well, then there's my work, and that goes another slice, and my hobbies, another slice, my family, and so on. And he said, this is how most of us live our life. But instead, what we need to do is this. And he would change the image to remove all the lines out of the pie and put God in the middle, and say, so our relationship with God is not just one piece separated from the rest of our life, but it should integrate and be something that's lived out in all of our life, discerning his presence, guiding and leading. And so I think of that whenever you talk about, whenever you share that message.
I think your mentor is a very wise person. And I just to build on what you said, I think about my life and our lives in concentric circles with God at the center, and it goes from God to us as individuals, to our family, to society, and then Christ gets expressed in all of those things. And I actually have drawn my life that way. I organize my computer files that way, and there are things at the center, and then there's family, and as part of family is a husband, dad, steward, pop. I'm now a granddad, and then in the outer circle, it's business leader. It's a civic leader. It's a friend. It's a friend of the poor. We're very involved with helping the poor. We've made 22 trips to Central America to help bring clean water to the poor, for example. So all of those flow from God as the fountainhead and into everything. It infuses everything we did, So I think for me, it's a very helpful way to look at it, and it's a very tangible way to look at it. Like I said, I organize my to-do list that way. The one I for today has inside out, and people to call and things to do on one side or the other side. So it's a very helpful way to think about it.
Yeah. Well, we have a little bit of time left. Before we go, you mentioned something just offhand a moment ago, an encore calling, something related to the launch of the book. Do you want to share about that before we go?
Sure. Yeah. So I, as you know, spent 40 years in a business career as a business executive, building and turning around businesses. I retired from the last one of those in March of this year. I've retired from that, but I have not retired from life. So my wife Lynn and I describe it as an encore calling, and we think this last part of our lives is an act of complete generosity. Hopefully, the rest of our lives have been also, but particularly in this season. And we think of it, the encore calling, as lines of service. So we talked about the expression of this. So this is the outer part of the circle, and the lines of. So we're investing in. It starts with prayer, and we're investing in the family and the poor and the next generation. And the lines of service are serving on corporate and nonprofit boards. They're writing, speaking, teaching, holistic accompaniment. And that's really how we see ourselves spending our lives. And we've developed a website that you can go to at barrylrowan.com that lays out some of these lines of service. But that's really what we plan on dedicating the rest of our life to. My dad's turning 100 this month, and he and my mom were both veterinarians. And my dad hung up his license when he was 96. So he's kind of my model. I think we're designed to make a contribution for the whole of our lives. And I love to play golf and ski, but the thought of doing that, and nothing else would drive me crazy. And I don't think Moses relied on his 401k for the last 20 years of his life. I think we're designed to leave it all on the field.
Wow, that's good. And what a great vision for all of us to aspire to, especially those in my age demographic and many of you in the audience who are still young or closer to middle age like me. Well, Barry, this has been just an excellent conversation. I've really enjoyed every minute of it. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time. I want to thank you for your book, The Spiritual Art of Business. If you guys want to pick up a copy of Barry's new book, I will have it linked in the show notes below. So make sure just go into the description of this podcast, or if you're on YouTube, the YouTube description, I'll have a link there, and you can pick up a copy for yourself to go through, and also if you would like to do it with a group, as Barry mentioned earlier, maybe get a couple of people together to go through it. So I'll have it linked there for you guys so that you can find it and enjoy it. So once again, Barry, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on Filter today.
Thank you very much, Aaron. It was a wonderful conversation. I would just add that if you go to the website, I've offered to drop into some of those group conversations as well. I can't do it to all of them because I think we're going to have a lot of interest here, but I want to keep a finger on the pulse and stay connected with how you all are doing. So thanks very much.
Okay, great. Well, I'll link your website in the show notes as well. So you guys, I'll have his website and the book in the show notes. So, all right, great. Well, yeah, thanks for taking the time today. Thanks for listening. I hope this episode provided you with biblical clarity to live with confidence in our confusing world. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can go to my website, aaronchamp.com. While you're there, subscribe to my newsletter so that you can be updated anytime I share new content. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Aaron M. Champ. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Until then, hold fast to the